Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for the first of our 2021 season reviews of each team across the calendar and see how they did in comparison to last year, what we made of each of the drivers' performances, and so on, diving into the details and having a little conversation about our thoughts on their performances this year. I think we'll just jump straight into it then with Haas this week, going in reverse championship order. Now, the vital statistics for Haas are not great, as they have not scored any points, and they had 8 retirements, which I think is more than anybody else possibly. But last year, when we were talking about Haas, I said that things had gone from bad to worse for them. And unfortunately this year, they've gone from worse to even worse. I think I predicted something like a Williams in 2019 year, and that was pretty much what we got, except for not quite sneaking 1 point in at a chaotic race like Williams did. Sadly, the car was just so far behind everyone else that the opportunity never arose, and they had to abandon any development of the VF21 because of their financial situation. And so they entered 2021 expecting a learning year and little else, and that was pretty much what they got. Do you think there's any real highlights in general that the team can pick up on from this year, or is it all bad news?
I think it's definitely been a development year for Haas. They turned around and said at the beginning of the season that this was the car they were driving for the rest of the year because they didn't have the financial backing or they didn't have the resources to develop that car and focus on the 22 car as well. But it's not, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. We've seen Nikita Mazepin, especially Nikita, go from quite a, not I want to say problematic driver, but he was making loads of mistakes at the beginning of the season. He really didn't get along with that car, which is, you know, it's not unusual. It's a brand new car. He's brand new to Formula One. And as far as Formula One cars go, it doesn't look like the best or the easiest one to handle. But as he's gone through the year, it looks like he's really got to grips with it. He's crashed and spun less throughout the year, which is definitely an improvement. And you've got to be able to measure improvement in different ways. Whereas Mick also, I think he's had a great year in the sense that he's pretty much outqualified his teammate at every single race. I think it might be every single race, and has always finished ahead.
20-2, I believe.
20-2. And you'll usually finished ahead of Nikita during the race. So both drivers have had strong years themselves.
16 out of 22 for the races.
There he is, the stat man. The stat man. Here. I think both drivers have had interesting years. They've been development years. It's 2 new drivers in Formula One. They've both made mistakes and they've both picked themselves up and moved forward. Hopefully next year the car will be a little bit better.
Yeah, looking at the drivers in a bit in detail, starting with let's start with Mazepin. I honestly thought things might go a lot worse for the Russian than they actually did, even if he still failed to really distinguish himself with any on-track performances. His best result was 14th at Azerbaijan. Ultimately, his season was spent at the back of the pack weekend after weekend. And to his credit, I suppose he was nowhere near as dirty on track as many people thought that he might be, myself included. But the fact that he was rarely actually racing anyone may have had some impact on that. So it remains to be seen how he might conduct himself when points are actually on the table. But it was good that he basically got his head down and is still clearly passionate about racing and performing on track, as evidenced by his teary interview in Brazil. But I think it's just a case of him keeping his head down and doing what he needs to do for the team. There was a little bit of friction between him and Schumacher in places where maybe he felt like Mick was being prioritised in certain cases, or agreements being made about who would go ahead in qualifying first or something weren't being honoured. Exactly what that was about, I don't really know, but they seem to patch it all up and get on with the job. It must have been a really frustrating season for any driver. Any driver who gets to Formula One is not rubbish. Right, anyone who can get to Formula One is not rubbish, because just to drive a Formula One car itself takes real skill. So whoever you are, even if you're the worst driver on the grid in Formula One, it's got to be frustrating.
Still a fantastic driver.
Still a good driver, and also it's got to be really irritating to just be at the back race after race after race, knowing that there is literally no chance of you doing any more than that, because they couldn't even put themselves in a position where the chaos could be taken advantage of. They were just so far behind, and in many races were lapped at least twice. So it's not good for either driver, really.
I think one of the biggest shames this year is that we've had a couple of really chaotic races. We had Hungary, where Bottas took out half the grid, a couple of cars at the start. And also we had Baku, where obviously Nikita had his best finish, you've already mentioned, in 14th place. But it's just a shame because we had so many retirements in Baku, and then we had a couple of lap sprint finish, and you think being at the back of the grid, you might be able to get the slipstream down that home straight and try and overtake a couple of cars into turn one and just maintain position for the rest of the lap, because it's a hard track to overtake on in sector 1 and sector 2. So all you got to do is maintain position. But it just didn't really scrape. I just didn't really move forward. And we've had, like I said, some chaotic races, and we just couldn't get a single point on the board for the Haas team, which is a real shame, because I hate it when I see teams who don't finish at all with any points. And this is even more of a shame for Haas, because in 2020 they finished with 3 points, and they were 9th in the Constructors' Championship, and a year later they've scored no points and they're stone dead last.
Then moving on to Schumacher, it was always expected that the son of a 7-time world champion would obviously become a standard bearer for the Ailing outfit as much as they could have one, and that was very much the case. I felt he helped the public image of the team, especially as he developed quite a public and transparent mentorship under Sebastian Vettel. There's a real sense that they were friends, but also there was a bit of a mentor-mentee relationship going on to some extent. He managed a best result of 12th that was in Azerbaijan as well. So that enabled him to be bumped a little bit further up the Drivers' Championship than Mazepin. But he did outqualify his teammate 20 times to 2 and finished ahead of him 16 of the 22 races, with obviously one race at the end where Mazepin didn't compete at all because he caught COVID and it was too late for them to replace him, etc. But Schumacher wasn't without his mishaps as well. He notably crashed under the safety car at Imola. He had plenty of spins in a car that in general looked really awkward to get any pace out of. Apparently, Mick Schumacher caused the highest amount of repair costs for his team out of all the drivers.
Wow.
And Mazepin was only 8th in that list, as it was. That's what Sky reported. So Schumacher was actually the most costly driver to have. Caused the most damage, apparently. There's the Destructors' Championship, as they call it.
They've won. They've come second or whatever it was. Yeah, wow. Yeah. That's impressive. I wouldn't have thought that. I knew they would be quite high as a team, but I didn't realize Nikita would be so low in comparison.
Yeah, I suppose he did have quite a few spins, but I don't think he actually put it into the wall or damaged the car quite as much. So he sort of obviously lacked the pace in comparison. But Mick had a consistent record against his teammate. There's also been announced that he's going to be Ferrari's test driver the next year. So it shows that there's a decent amount of potential there that extends beyond merely his family name. I think he can come out of that season feeling pretty good. And I think that it helps a lot of drivers to have a season in machinery that is tough to deal with. There's a certain kind of, it builds character kind of attitude, which feels like a bit of a old-fashioned attitude to have, really. But I think drivers generally can be better for it, to have that experience and to have a development year like that where they know what it's like to fight from the back, and it makes their rise to the top feel that much more sort of exciting narratively, I suppose.
Arguably, it was quite nice for both Nikita and Mick to start in a team which weren't going to score any points at all this year. I mean, they would have been nice if they scored 1 or 2 points, but there was no pressure. There was no pressure to score points. They're fighting, the best place between them was 12th. So, if that's as good as you can get, there's actually not much pressure on you. Yes, you've got to perform day in, day out, but you're not fighting for the millions of pounds which the other teams are. You're fighting and you're learning at the same time. And it must have been quite a nice learning environment because there wasn't much to lose, if you get what I mean. Does that make sense? Like, because they weren't losing points, they weren't losing all this money in the constructors fighting for 7th, 8th or 9th. They could just go out there and drive the best they could, and it was always going to be good enough because they weren't going to lose anything.
Yeah, not so much drive to survive as drive to drive.
Yeah. Drive to learn.
Drive to have a little go. So it's difficult to say too much about Haas, really, because there's just so little to remark on other than how often they got lapped and they were just in a little battle between themselves. But what do you expect out of them coming into the new season? Complete, tabula rasa. They have an opportunity to step in and do something a bit different if they can bring a decent car.
Without being rude, it can't get much worse. I mean, their worst case scenario is they score the same amount of points as they've done this year, and they wouldn't be okay. But they've done it once. They could probably get away with doing it again. I don't know what their financial commitments are and backing is going into the 2022 season. But that is worst case scenario. They finish at the back of the pack with no points, and they've done that already, and they seem to be dealing with it okay. Any points on the table, any points would be remarkable. If you just look at today's season, actually, if they had picked up a handful of points here and there, they may have scraped ninth or potentially eighth. If that car was just a little bit more competitive. Because it was those weird and wonderful races where Williams and Alfa Romeo picked up those decent amount of points, which pushed them further along the table. So if they had any car which was slightly competitive, and I feel horrible for saying it because the Haas was awful this year, but if they had any competitive car, they might have been able to scrape a couple of points here and there, and that is a massive win. I can't wait to see those two drivers get their first points. Everyone talks about drivers stepping onto the podium for the first time and getting their first win or getting their first podium. But drivers getting their first points is also a massive deal. When you've been fighting for points for a long time, look at George Russell when he scored his first points. It was like a win for him. Outside of Mercedes, of course. In the Williams, it was like a win for him. Nicholas Latifi, he was so ecstatic when he scored points because they'd been fighting for so long. And I can't wait to see Nick and Nikita, just enjoy that moment when they eventually do score points. And I really hope it comes for them next year.
Yeah, I'm not anticipating them suddenly swooping up the order. And yeah, scoring points will be a really big achievement for them to get back into scoring ways. You have to remember, of course, that the points system being what it is now, it used to be a lot harder just to score any points. So it's still a big achievement to score points in Formula One. And we did speculate a little bit at the start of the season that the team's owner and namesake, obviously Gene Haas, might be losing interest in his F1 venture, and that the new Ural Kali, however it's pronounced, the title sponsor, might signal an intention to sell on, but we don't have anything concrete on that. And even after, this is after their worst season so far, like you said, it's possible that the new financial regulations and the cash injection that they've had from their title sponsor might have them a bit more hopeful for a small comeback next year, but I think they've still got to be patient. It's very rare that teams just suddenly burst onto go from one season doing really badly to doing really well, unless you have huge resources behind you. It's only really teams like Ferrari that have times like that where they have a season it goes really badly, and next year they throw all their resources into it and they're back where they expect to be. And Haas have just had this constant, slightly depressing downward trend where they turned up as these giant killers, and wow, it's an American team in the sport, and they're showing everyone how it's done, surprising everyone with their quality, and it's just all been downhill from there with the Rich Energy scandal and just their teammates crashing into each other and not really having much of a good relationship. And then obviously this year where performance-wise it's the worst it's ever been. So just some kind of slight upward trend, a point or two, that really would make all the difference. And like you say, no one wants to see a grid where there's a team where you feel like they've just got no hope. You don't like the idea of having any no-hopers on the grid. And I think it is a lot better than it used to be. It's so much better than it used to be.
100%.
Do you remember, was it 2012 where there were 3 teams that didn't score? And, you just can't help but think, like, why are they there? And I think F1 in general felt that way too. I think that's why those big restrictions were put in, like, you have to give $200 million to all the other teams just to start or something, which seems incredibly punitive, but at the same time, it's an expensive business, and if you can't afford that, you probably can't afford to get anywhere near competing in the sport. And if you can't score and you're going to get lapped by everyone else, there's just no point in you being there, really. You're not contributing anything to the sport or to the entertainment because nobody's going to see your car. They're only going to see it getting lapped. It's probably not a good look for the sponsors.
And is it a worrying time for Haas, given that they joined a couple of years ago now? And like you said, they've been on that slow spiral down from scoring a decent amount of points, I think finishing 6th in the Constructors' Championship, to now dwindling down to 10th place. How many years can that team survive at the position they're in before they call it quits? Because like you said, it's an expensive sport and they've got to be earning money at some point during the year. And most of that money comes from either sponsors, which they don't have a lot of, or winning points or scoring points and winning Constructors' Championships. So how many years do you think you've got left, if any? Well, not if any, because obviously they're coming into next year, but
yeah. Well, the one thing that they do potentially win, I haven't put too much thought into it. Maybe it doesn't matter what is the best, but they're definitely one of my favourite liveries on the grid. They got a good looking car. I like the new Haas branding with the sort of retro white and blue and red. And there was a little bit of upset about their livery having a Russian flag on it, but I don't really care about that. I think it's a good looking car.
Nice.
And,
it really does.
a lot of their money is clearly coming from a big Russian sponsor, so I don't really think it's that big. I mean, I think if you go back and listen to our episode, what was it, back in March or something, where we talked about the launch reaction, I think I said that the Russian athletes aren't allowed to fly the Russian flag or something, and it's a pretty pathetic punishment when you think about it, really. So I don't really see the issue. I think it's a good looking car, Russian flag or no.
I love the design. It's simple, it's elegant. Whoever did it, fair play. I think we actually reached out to them on Twitter like you said, way back in March, and we were like, you've done a great job. Despite all the hate what people are giving you, it's one of the best looking cars on the grid. It's just different, and it's just so well designed. So actually, it's up there with one of the best looking cars, and I hope they keep it for the 2022 season because it's a good looking car, like you said. Right, that's our 2021 season roundup for the Haas team. 0, 0, and 0 all round. Very consistent for the Haas team. 0 points across the board. Thank you very much for listening. And if you've got any thoughts or opinions and you want to share them with us, you can do by contacting us on Twitter at RacePerMinute. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can comment down below and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a like rating. And if you like what we do, please consider subscribing for more wherever you get your Race Per Minute podcast, whether that's on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Prime Music. Is that a thing? I think that's a thing. Or YouTube. Giving us a thumbs up, a like rating, and subscribing helps keep the algorithm working in our favor. We're not quite sure how it works, but it just shows us that you like what we're doing, and we'll continue producing these episodes. And if you really want to support the show and help keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards, you can do by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. So that's it for Haas. Alex, what team are we moving on to next?
Well, moving up the constructors table, we'll be moving on to Alfa Romeo and talk about how they did this year. So we'll see you in the next episode.
See you in the next episode.